But what do you say we close out this series strong today? I believe in closing out series in a strong way. We're going to look in our Bibles at John chapter number 13. We're going to look at a man named Jesus who was the definition of strong, but also another man named Peter who was a little bit more like me, a little bit more like some of us, I think, than we care to admit. But in John chapter number 16, we see that Jesus has just predicted his betrayal. He's just predicted that he is going to be betrayed by Judas. And then immediately after predicting that betrayal, he predicts his denial. He predicts that Peter is going to deny even knowing him. And it's funny because whenever we talk about Judas betraying Jesus, we kind of get into this mode of like, oh, what a terrible person. He's the worst ever. And granted, it is an awful thing. But we show a lot more grace to Peter, right? Like we talk about Judas, but we show a lot more grace to Peter. But what's so fascinating to me is that immediately after talking about the betrayal that would come, he goes and he talks about the denial that Peter would have. Because the Bible says that if you deny me before man, I will deny you before my Father. So he goes and he talks about the betrayal, but then he talks about the denial. So Peter and Judas had a little bit more in common than I think we're comfortable with, a little bit more in common than I think even Peter would have been comfortable with. But we see in verse number 36, it says, Simon Peter asked him, Lord, where are you going? Jesus replied, where I am going, you cannot follow now, but you will follow later. And Peter asked, Lord, why can't I follow you now? I will lay down my life for you. Peter's like, Jesus, I'm all in, right? I'm all in. Chips on the table, pushing them all in. I'm all in for you. I would die for you. I'd give my life for you. I'm your ride or die, Jesus. Like, if you die, I'm going with you. It's all good. I am there. I am all in. But Jesus answered him in verse 38, will you really lay down your life for me? You ever had somebody that said something to you, and as soon as they said it, you knew they were lying? You know what I mean? Like you had somebody, and they said something to you, and you were just like, but you were kind enough, instead of calling them on it, you were kind enough to give them a chance to self-correct. It's like, I know that you're lying, but I'm going to allow you to correct it. That's what Jesus is doing here. Peter's like, I'm all in for you, Jesus. And Jesus says, would you really die for me? Like, really, really? Really, really, really? Like, wink, wink, Peter, I'm trying to give you an out here. You want to go back on it a little bit? He said, would you really die for me? Very truly, I tell you, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. Peter really believed that he was all in for Jesus. And I think it's so important that we understand. Peter, he thought that what he was saying was true. He thought he was all in for Jesus. He thought telling Jesus, listen, I would die for you. I'd give my life for you. I'm with you till the end. He thought he meant that. But Jesus knew that Peter would go back on it. Peter knew Jesus knew that Peter would deny him and that he'd go back on it. For one, it's because he's Jesus and he knows everything, but also because Peter had a bad habit of having these great moments of faith only to go back on them. Peter had a real bad habit of stepping out, like in the emotion and in the feeling of the moment, of stepping out and saying these great things only to go back on it when he saw something that caused him to be afraid. And I think more of us can relate to that than we'd like to admit. So many of us, we come to church on Sunday morning, we got a bad habit of coming to church, hands lifted, hands raised. I'm all in for you, God. I do it all for you. Whatever you tell me to do, I'm going to do it. And God's like, I need you to break up with that person. It's like, let me backtrack a little bit now. Right? We come into church, it's like, God, I would do it all for you. God says, I know you're not loving your job, but I need you to stay there for 6 more months because then the promotion is going to come. It's not coming now. It's going to go to somebody else. But you got to see them go, and the company has to see them go and take it from you, and then they're going to fail, and then they're going to realize the mistake they made, and you're actually going to end up in a better position than you were. But it's like 6 months. I don't know. We have bad habits of making these great declarations to God only to go back on them when life gets tough. That's Peter. He had a habit of saying these great things. He does it here. He says, Jesus, I'm not going to deny you. And he does. But he also, if you'll remember, there was a time that he was on a boat in a storm, and Jesus was out there, and Peter said, hey, if it's you, tell me to come, and I'll come out of the boat, come walking to you. And Jesus said, okay, it's me, come on. And Peter got out of the boat, and he started walking, and then he saw the fear of the storm, and he started to sink. He had a bad habit of these amazing declarations of faith that he was unable to back up. You ever known somebody that was all talk and no game? They knew the words, they said it all, they had the big talk, but they couldn't ever back it up. That was Peter. He had this bad habit of doing this, and so he did this on the water. Now he tells Jesus, I would die for you, only to go back on it. And what's amazing is Peter had a great heart. I think Peter had the right ambition. I think when Peter said it, he actually meant it. I think he meant like, Jesus, I would die for you. But he also just had this habit of allowing what he saw or what people said or what he experienced in his life to pull him back. He had a bad habit of not being able to follow through. He had a bad habit of quitting and of giving up and of stopping short for what God was wanting to do. And throughout this series, we've talked a lot about ways to create good habits and ways to have new habits and the right habits in our lives. But it's hard to have a good new habit when you still have bad habits. It's hard to step into good habits when you have bad habits that are still holding you back. And what we do a lot of times is we start this game in our minds of, okay, I've got this bad habit, but how much can I do that's good to outweigh it? I don't want to get rid of the habit, right? I don't want to have to start waking up early in the morning. But maybe if I just work harder when I'm at work, then I can actually still come in late. No, you're still getting fired. You're still getting fired for not showing up on time. Go to your boss and tell them, well, you know, if I got up earlier and came in earlier, then I wouldn't have to work so hard. But you don't even know how hard I'm working, because they'll tell you, you should always be working that hard. You should just start about an hour earlier. So often we have bad habits. It's like, I'm going to eat whatever I want, but it's okay because I'm going to exercise. See, I'm in the gym so that I can eat whatever I want. But there's no progress made because your diet is like, I hate to be honest, but it's like 70%, I feel. Because trust me, I've been in the gym before, but I've still been eating junk, and I hadn't seen any progress. And we have bad habits that we don't want to get rid of, that we want to hold on so tightly to, that cause us to not be able to step into what God has for us. And we think that the good habits that we do have outweighs the bad habits that we also have. Peter's like, listen, I want to do what I'm telling Jesus I'm going to do. But Peter's bad habit of having a lack of faith in difficult moments caused him to not be able to do what he thought he was going to do. And so many times this is what happens to us. We are allowing ourselves to miss out on the greatness that God has for us because we're so tied to our bad habits that we can't let them go. And instead of letting them go and removing them from our lives, we think if I can just pick up a new good habit, that it'll make up for it. God said, no, if you want to see the greatness in your life that I have for you, you got to remove the bad habits and pick up some good habits. It's not both. It's not, I have bad habits and I have good habits. It's removing the bad and replacing it with the good. And I want to talk to you on the subject this morning, missing out on great. Missing out on great. Let's pray together. God, I thank you for today. I thank you that today is a great day. I pray, Lord, that you would speak to our hearts, that you would prepare us, Lord, if we're in person. Those of us who are joining online, I pray that you would be with each and every one of us. Help us to hear from you. Help us to receive what you have to say. Lord, I pray that you would do what only you can do. Help nobody to see and hear from me, but to see and hear from you. And I thank you for it in Jesus' name. And everybody said, amen. Now, how many of you have pets? And I'm going to make you raise your hand because it's Memorial Day weekend, and I'm just going to get some energy in there. Yeah, okay, so we have pets, right? My wife and I, we only have one pet. Pets are amazing, right? We love pets. Pets are great because they bring joy. They can kind of bring like some comfort. You have somebody with you there. It's like some kind of camaraderie, right? And they bring joy in your life. If you have a cat, it brings you misery. But if you have any other kind of pet, it brings such joy and such amazement in your life. And see, I'm just going to keep going. But Nicole and I, we have one pet. We have a dog, right? And his name's Rigsby. We used to have two. So Rigsby was Nicole's dog when we got married. Lakota was my dog when we got married. Lakota passed away last year. So now we just have Rigsby. And I was kind of close to Rigsby before Lakota passed, but now I'm super close to him because he's the only dog in the house, right? He's the only pet that we have. And so we've kind of gotten close. And even though we're close, he still frustrates me sometimes. You know what I mean? Like he still gets on my nerves. I think it's like probably anybody, you know, in life. It's not just with pets, it's with people. It's like, I love you, but you are driving me crazy, right? Like that happens. And so that's Rigsby. Like there's little things that he does, like when he runs really fast through the house and then just slides across the rug. I don't know why, but it just stresses me out. I'm just like, oh, stop, like calm down. Like there's little things he does. But then I get to feeling bad because there's some stuff that he does that he cannot help. That irritates me. Like whenever he gets sick in the house and will throw up in the house, it makes me upset because we got to clean it up. And I'm a neat freak. So now it's like, some of y'all, you just like wipe it up. No, you got to sanitize that mess. You're not just leaving dog. You don't know what was in that. So then it's a whole ordeal, right? And it's a whole thing. So it frustrates me, but I feel bad that it frustrates me because it's not like he can help it. He's locked in our house. What's he going to do? You know, just like explode? Like it's got, you know, it has to happen. So I feel bad about feeling bad, or being upset, but at the same time, sometimes I don't because he brings it on himself. Right? And a few months ago, actually last fall, he got real sick for like 5 days. He threw up every day for like 5 days. I'm like, oh my goodness, we already lost Lakota. Now it's Rigsby. What's going on? So we took him to the vet. We get to the vet, and the vet checks him out, does all this stuff. You know, and it's like, do you want to do this test? You want to do that test? You want to do that test? I'm like, how much is that going to cost me? She's like, oh, it's not that much, not that much. And I get the bill, and I'm like, you lied. But all these tests and all these things, find out he's okay. So I'm like, I want my money back. But he's okay, so everything's fine. And she said, just take him home, watch him for a little bit. So I take him home, you know, and we watch him. And so that's exactly what I did. So I got to thinking, he has this really bad habit of eating stuff, right? Because it doesn't click in his mind that if he eats something and then throws it up, he probably shouldn't eat it. But he still continues to eat it. So he'll eat something, throw it up, and then the next time he has an opportunity to eat it, guess what he's going to do? He's going to eat it, and the next time, and the next time, and the next time. So I got to thinking, maybe when he's going outside, he's eating something that he's not supposed to. And he's had a habit before. We have horses on one side of us, the neighbor does, and the other neighbor has cows. And he has a bad habit of going into those fields and eating the fertilizer. You understand what I'm saying? Like he's picking up what they're putting down, right? So he likes to go over into these fields, and he likes to do all these things. And so I got to thinking, maybe he's doing that, because that would make me sick, right? So I watch him, and I'm looking, and he doesn't go to the fields. But yet that night, he still threw up in the house. And this is the thing that really gets me, is he doesn't do it while we're awake. He waits until like 2 o'clock in the morning, and you just hear like this, you know, happening. And so you're like, nobody likes to be woken up that way, you know? So in the middle of that night, he did it again, and I'm like, what is happening? So the next day, I watch him, and I see him go over to this persimmon tree that we have. And the persimmons are like laying on the ground, and he's eating them. And it clicked in my head, because I've been trying to figure out what is triggering this. What is triggering him getting sick? And I watch him, and he eats these persimmons, and that night, he threw up. So the next day when he went out and tried to eat the persimmons, I was like, absolutely not. No, sir. It's just a fruit, but apparently it doesn't set well with him. So the next day I stopped him. Guess what didn't happen that night? He didn't get sick. Next day I wouldn't let him eat them, even though he tried. He didn't get sick. Next day, even though he tried, he didn't get sick. And I finally found what was triggering this sickness. But we never would have been able to stop him from getting sick if we wouldn't have first found out what was triggering it. If we wouldn't have identified the trigger. And the first thing I need you to see this morning as we close out this series is you have to identify the trigger. You got to identify the trigger. Type that in the chat if you're online. You got to identify the trigger. In Peter's life, Peter's bad habits, your friend's bad habits, my bad habits, all of our habits have something in common. They all have a trigger. They all have a trigger. Different triggers, sure. But every bad habit in your life and in my life and in Peter's life, it has a trigger. Something that sets it off. Something that causes it to happen. For me, biting my nails and my skin, that is a trigger that comes from stress. When I get stressed, I can't even help it. Like Nicole can tell, my mom can tell, if you look at like my fingers, they're like, what are you stressed about? Like they can tell. And then when I'm in a season of no stress, I will brag about how long my fingernails are. Right? And I'm like, look, this is like, it's nasty, but look how long my fingernail is. I'm going to let it grow as long as I can. But then it's like I get stressed and it's gone. We have triggers, things that trigger us to do things. For some people, stress causes them to eat. For some people, stress causes them to do other things. But it's not just stress. There's all kinds of different things in our lives that will trigger us. And in John chapter number 16, we see, or John 18, we see where Peter has said he will not deny Jesus, but now he's actually faced with the moment. And we see the triggers in verse 17. It says, you aren't one of this man's disciples too, are you? She asked Peter, and Peter says no. John 18:25, another person. Meanwhile, while Simon Peter was standing there warming himself, they asked him, you aren't one of his disciples too, are you? And he denied it, saying, I am not. John 18:26 and 27, one of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, challenged him, didn't I see you with him in the garden? And again, Peter denied it. Every lie that Peter told was triggered by something. For him, in this moment, it was triggered by fear of man. He was afraid of what would happen if he told them the truth. When he was walking on water, he was afraid of what would happen if he started to sink. And guess what happened? He started to sink. Everything in Peter's life was being triggered by fear of what would happen to him. Here he's afraid of people. But you cannot conquer what you do not understand. You cannot conquer what you don't understand. You cannot overcome a bad habit if you do not know what is triggering the habit. So many of us were like, we indulge in the bad habit and then we're immediately feeling remorse and we're like, I'm never going to do that again. But what happens? We do it again. Then we're like, I'm never going to do it again. And we do it again because we're looking at the wrong thing. We're looking at the habit when we should be looking for the trigger. We're looking at what we're doing wrong instead of looking at why we're doing it. You can't overcome a bad habit if you don't know what's causing it. Peter could not overcome his habit of having these great moments of faith only to backtrack when it got difficult because he didn't know what was causing it. And this is why this is so difficult to talk about, because I believe that Peter legitimately thought that he was going to do the right thing. I think Peter legitimately had the right heart. I believe he legitimately wanted to walk on water. I believe he legitimately wanted to not deny Jesus and to be willing to stand up for Jesus and to give his life for Jesus if he had to. I believe Peter wanted to do that. I do not believe that he just said, Jesus, I will never leave you. I'll never deny you. I don't believe that he said, Jesus, I would die for you just to say it. I believe that he meant it. He meant every word. He thought that he meant it. But when the moment came, it all changed. And something triggered the complete opposite of what he had said. Have you ever had a time where you were going into a situation and you said, listen, today I'm going to be on my best behavior. I'm on my best behavior. And then you saw somebody, like it goes a couple different ways, right? For me, I have a friend I'm not allowed to sit next to in church or in stuff at school. Like this friend, we can't help but laugh at things that we should not be laughing at, right? Like we just can't. Like when I'm preaching, I'm thinking about myself and my friend, and I'm like, I don't want to say something that I would laugh at because it's like I've messed with my own head. Because like when we're in places, we just laugh at stuff and we can't help it. And it's like when we try to hold it in, we just bust out laughing. You know, it's even worse. And there's people like that. Like you want to be on your best behavior, but then something happens and triggers the opposite. For some of us, it's like we want to be on our best behavior, but somebody says something the wrong way and we go sideways. There's all these different things in our lives that kind of mess with us and that are triggers that we don't even know. But for Peter, until he could identify what was triggering the things in his life, it was always going to be a problem for him. There's three types of people in the world. There's those who know that they have bad habits. They know what's triggering the bad habit, and they don't care, and they continue to go to it anyways. There's those who know they have a bad habit. They know what triggers the bad habit, and they take care of the trigger. And then there's those who know they have a bad habit, but they have no idea why. They have no idea what's triggering it. And because they don't know what's triggering it, they can't handle it. Because they don't know what's triggering the bad habit, they can't get it under control. If you do not know, how can you control it? If you don't know what's triggering it, how can you get rid of the trigger? You can't. So this morning I want to tell you real quickly, I want to tell you five main classifications for triggers. There are 5 main things. There's more than this, but almost every trigger for a bad habit will fall into one of 5 classifications. And it's place, time, mood, moment, and people. Place, time, mood, moment, and people. You got a place where every time you go to that place, it brings back memories that are so difficult for you that it just floods you with guilt, floods you with unforgiveness, floods you with bitterness, floods you with frustration. Every time you go to that place, it's like you go into a place of depression and you can't handle it. Then there's a place that you may go to, and every time you go to that place, you end up doing something stupid. Every time you go to that place, you end up doing something that you shouldn't. Every time you go to that place, you do something crazy. Then you got time. For some of us, time is the biggest problem. Late at night, when no one's around, no one's watching, doing things on our phone, on our computers that we know that we shouldn't do. Some of us early in the morning before we've had our coffee is when our temper is the worst. It's like early, like some of us need to wear a shirt that says, please don't talk to me until 10 a.m. Right? Because some of us, like in the morning, it's just crazy. Like we're not morning people and we just can't get over it. So for some of us, if it's early, it's a trigger for us. No matter what somebody says or does, it just hits different because it's early or because it's late. Like for me, I'll be honest, it's late. When it starts getting late, my filter starts to go away. It's dangerous. Like I know when I need to go to bed, right? And you got to begin to learn, like, maybe even though I want to stay out and do some things, maybe it's not best that I do because I know that I need to get home and go to bed, because if I don't, then I'm going to be tired and I'm going to say things, I'm going to do things that I don't want to say and that I don't want to do. So you got place, you got time, then you got mood. For some of us, it's the mood of the moment. For some of us, it may be making decisions when we're hangry. Some of us don't need to make decisions when we're hangry. Or maybe just like don't allow ourselves to be hangry. For some of us, it's when we're lonely or when we're frustrated or when we feel guilty. When we're in that mindset, we don't think clearly. We don't make the decisions that we need to make in those moods. And then you got the moments, doing the same thing in every moment. For some of us, it's like, When you have a moment where you have an argument with your spouse, and the first thing you do is go and have a bash party to all your friends, just bashing them, talking about how terrible they are. You know what that does? That causes them to then feed into what you're dishing and what you're telling them. And so then they're going to start to poison your mind even worse. So now you were kind of upset at your spouse, but now that all of this has happened and you've heard everything that they've been saying, now you go to your spouse and you're like, I can't believe you don't do this, and I can't believe you don't do that. And then it's a huge thing. So why do you have a bad habit of constantly fighting with your spouse? It could be because when something small happens, you go to your friends and you tell them everything, and then they poison your mind, and you go back to your spouse, and then it blows up into something that never even needed to be a thing. Some of us, we have a bad habit of when we get dumped, we call up the person from a past toxic relationship for a hookup. Every time we get dumped, we're calling the same person. We know how it's going to end up. We know it's going to be poisonous, but because we got dumped by this person, we're like, well, maybe they were the one. I need to call them up. They're single again. Oh, they're not even single, but it's okay because I was their number one anyways. Call them up. We got a bad habit in those moments of doing things. There's all kinds of different moments in our lives that cause us to do things. And then the last thing is you got people. So you got time, you got place, you got mood, you got moment, and you have people. And people is one of the primary ones. There's people, every time you hang out with that person, you do something you should not do. Every time you hang out with that person, like you can be going to dinner, but every time you hang out with them, you do something stupid. You do something that you know you shouldn't do. You go out to dinner with this person, and you're like, I can't get into trouble. It's just one drink at dinner. But you know they don't stop at one, and it goes to two, and then it goes to three, and then it goes to four, and before you know it, you got DUI. There's all kinds of people in our lives that we don't even understand the effect that they're having on us. And every time, it's like, why do I always get in trouble with that person? Maybe because you don't need to be hanging out with that person. There's people in our life, every time we're with them, we do something that we should not do. Then there's people, every time you're around them, you lose your temper. Every time. It's something about their face that when you see it, it's like, God, you got to come down to me right now if I'm not going to say what I want to say. It's just, there's people like that. And it's okay. We are to love all people. Doesn't mean you have to hang out with all people. So there are some people that you got to understand. I love them so much that I'm not going to let them see me, because if they see me, it's not going to be good. Every time we hang out with them, we lose our temper. Then there's people that every time we hang out with them, every time we're with them, we cheat on our spouse in our mind. Every time we're around that person, nothing physically's happened, but a soul tie gets created, because every time we're with them, there's something about them that's drawing us to them. And we aren't mature enough and committed enough, not just to our spouse, but to God, to say, I'm stopping this thing right now. It may be a one-way street, but guess what? Most of the time, it's not. Oh, well, they're taken too. They're married too. And? If you're still, every time you're seeing that person and talking to them, and you start wondering in your mind, I wonder what would happen if we were together. I wonder what would happen if my husband or my wife started acting like they're acting. I think I would, maybe I can get my spouse to start to act like them. That's what I'm going to do, because that's how I'm going to solve the problem. No, that's not solving the problem. Solving the problem is saying, listen, great person, I can't hang out with you no more. Not even your fault, it's mine, right? I have an issue that I got to work through. But I'm not going to allow myself to be put in that situation. Some of us, we have that, where every time we see somebody, it's a problem. Then we have those, every time we're around that person, we give into peer pressure. It's time and time again, doing what we know we shouldn't do. People are one of the greatest triggers, but you got time, you got place, you got mood, you got moment, and you got people. And I can't tell you what yours is. There are professional people that can. I can't. I'm a pastor, and I'm going to preach. I'm going to stick to what I can do. I can't tell you what your trigger is, but we all have triggers in our lives, and we have classifications, categories where those triggers affect us the most. And if we do not first figure out what is triggering those things, it's never going to get better. If we don't stop the trigger, then we're going to continue in the bad habit. If you don't stop, and then not only that, it may grow, it may intensify. Your bad habit, the more that you do it, will continue to grow and get worse and worse and worse. So it may start out where you just see somebody else and you're like, I wonder what it'd be like to be married to them. And then it grows into something worse where you're actually acting on things that you should not be doing. We got to realize that there are triggers in our lives, and we have to be mature enough and honest enough with ourselves, and we have to remove our pride to say, you know what, this is something that I'm struggling with, and I've got to end the trigger. Got to stop the trigger. People are one of the greatest ones in our lives, I will say that. And that it was for Peter. For Peter, he is so worried about these people that he's like, I've got to deny Jesus. That's why 1 Corinthians 15:33, it says, bad company corrupts good character. Corrupts good character. You gotta identify the trigger. And then once you identify the trigger, this is the hard part. You gotta remove the trigger. You gotta identify it, then you gotta remove it. John 13:38, it said, Jesus answered, will you really lay down your life for me? Very truly, I tell you, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. Once we identify the triggers, then we have to remove the triggers. It does no good to identify something and not get rid of it. And identifying the trigger is difficult, but removing the trigger is the hardest part. How do we remove the triggers in our lives? Jesus actually gave us the answer in his exchange with Peter. He said, will you really lay down your life for me? The answer is in the question. Will you really lay down your life for me? Peter's like, listen, Jesus, I don't want to continue to make the same mistakes. I don't want to continue to do the wrong thing. I don't want to deny you. I don't want to get it wrong this time. I want to get it right. I want to do this. And Jesus said, will you really lay down your life for me? In other words, the only way to truly remove the triggers in your life is to completely lay down your life. To completely lay down your life at the feet of Jesus. I'm not talking about you hold on to one little aspect of it. I'm talking about you completely lay down your life and say, have it all. It's all here. Lay it down. Because it is great to want to. It is great to want to overcome the habit. It is great to want to remove the trigger. But here's the clinch. Here's the clincher. Only you have the power to do it. It's great to have a heart, I just want to get rid of this habit. Why do I keep doing this? Why do I keep going in and doing things I know I shouldn't do? Why can't I overcome this trigger? Why is this all happening? It's great to want to, but only you have the power to actually do it. God can't do it for you. Your family can't do it for you. Your pastor can't do it for you. Your friends that you hang out with can't do it for you. Only you have the power to lay down your life. And if you are going to remove the triggers that are causing you to go into bad habits, then you have to be willing to lay down your life, to lay down your agenda, to lay down your preferences, to lay down your desires, to lay down your plans. You got to lay it down. Some of us that keep overspending, you need to let somebody else create a password for your Amazon account and not tell you. Like they have the password. Like if you want to buy something, you have to go to them, and then they got to say, okay, well, okay, you're good. Some of us say, like, we can't help it, right? Late at night, listen, I've been there. Can't sleep in the middle of the night. Something random pops on your head. Hop on Amazon. There it is. Oh, my goodness, it's Prime. Means if I don't like it, I can send it back. I'm not going to send it back, but if I don't like it, I can send it back. You give somebody else your password. Some of us, we need to stop going to Target. Because you go to Target for like $5 worth of groceries, and then you come home with like $150 of like things you don't, like I don't even know how it ended up in the basket. If you really want to control your spending, go to Walmart because you don't want to buy anything from there anyways. Don't be going to Target. We know when we go to Target, it starts out small, and then it grows. Maybe that's just my household. Maybe I'm just preaching to the choir. I don't know. But we got to learn, like, there are things that are triggering things, and we've got to be willing to lay it down, to remove it, to do whatever it takes to get rid of that thing. If you can't stop making bad decisions when you're hanging out with a certain group of friends or a certain friend, find new friends. Find new friends. We've been friends for 20 years, and you've been doing the same thing over and over and over and over for 20 years. Find new friends. You may be amazed how much your life would increase, how much greater your life would be if you'd make the decision, I'm going to find new friends. It's time for me to find new friends. Why have to resist the temptation tomorrow if you have the power to eliminate it today? Why have to resist that thing tomorrow if you can just completely get rid of the trigger today? With that relationship, with that situation. Why do it? You got to identify the trigger. Then you got to remove the trigger. And when you remove the trigger, it will interrupt the action. And that's the last thing I want you to see today is interrupt the action. Philippians 4:8, I love this so much. It says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. And then pair that with Proverbs 23:7. It says, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. So is he. The goal is not to figure out how many good habits do I need to balance out the bad habits. The goal is not to figure out, are my bad habits really affecting me that much? Are they really holding me back that much? The goal is not to try to do this balancing act of I've got good and I've got bad, and I'm just it's like a seesaw, and I'm just trying to keep it level and trying to keep it there. That's not the goal. The goal is to remove anything in our lives that is unlike Christ. Remove anything in our lives that is causing us to not experience the greatness that God has for us. I'll put it to you like this. The habits that you have today are preparing you for where you're going to go tomorrow. And when you understand that, do you like the direction that your habits are taking you? Because it may not matter today. It may not matter right now. This is important that you get this. It may not matter right now the habit that you have. It may not be affecting anything in your life. Your pornography addiction and habit may not be affecting anything because you're single. You feel like it's not affecting anybody, right? You feel like that. But then you get married, and you find you couldn't cut it off just as quickly as you thought that you could. And now, it was already affecting you, but you felt like you could handle it. So now you're married, and you got somebody else. Too real, I don't know. But the thing in your life, it may not be affecting you right now, but it could affect you later. Your temper that you can't get under control right now may not affect you right now. But what about when you have children and they catch you at the wrong time? If you don't take care of the habits when you don't feel like you have to, then you're never going to take care of them. There are habits in our lives, and it may not matter right now, may not seem to do a whole lot right now, may not seem to be hurting a lot right now, but it will later. And the habits you have today are determining the direction of your life later. You have to interrupt the action now so that you don't have to deal with the repercussions later. For every action, there is an equal reaction. For everything that you do, there is going to be a reaction. And if you will take care of it now, if you will identify and remove the trigger now, so that whatever it may be, the action, if you'll remove it now, then you'll be able to interrupt it preemptively before it ever affects your life. That way you're not getting to the end of it and saying, I wish I'd have spent more time with my kids. That way you're not getting to the end of it and saying, I wish I'd have forgiven that person so that I could have had a relationship with them. Or I wish I would have forgiven that person before they were no longer here. That way you don't get to the point where you're saying, you know what? I wish that I had never started this thing because I never knew that I wouldn't be able to stop it. I wish I'd have never even started this thing because I never knew that it would ruin my life the way that it has. It's not just about trying to figure out, okay, I'm got this. This is not the greatest for me. This is not the best habit for me to have, but it's okay. It's not really hurting anybody. It's okay right now. I got it managed because right here, you see, I'm praying. I read my Bible. I go to church. I got all that good stuff. And over here, I'm doing everything bad during the week, but it's okay because I'm balanced, right? Because on Sunday morning, I'm at church. No, it's not about that. It's about removing the habits in our lives, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 24/7, 365, removing the habits now so that we don't miss out on what can happen in our lives later. Removing the trigger now, interrupting the trigger now so that it doesn't carry over later in our lives, so that we don't miss out on the greatness that God has for us. Don't get so short-sighted that you're just thinking about right now. But in every decision, in every habit, in everything that you're doing, be thinking about, what will this affect down the road?